Agony is a first-person survival horror game set in the deepest, darkest regions of hell. It was developed by Madmind Studio and published by Playway. Unlike games such as Doom or Dante's Inferno, you will not be hacking and slashing through the demon hordes, but instead cowering and running away from them. It's no secret that the game had a difficult launch, but what was its history? Before Agony even had the chance of being a video game, there were a series of animations made that were supposed to depict what the game would be like. Most of the imagery, the key enemies, and the gameplay mechanics were showcased in these custom animations designed to resemble what gameplay would be like. And indeed, the final product heavily resembled these animations. These animations were made by Tomek Dutkiewicz, a Polish game developer, who already had some game development experience under his belt, but never as the head of a project. Rather than the sort of first-person shooter games he normally made, he wanted to develop a survival horror game, and sure enough, he had a lot of ideas for it. These animations were well received by people on YouTube. The comment sections were filled with people, as scarce as it might be, who encouraged him to finalize his idea into a proper game, rather than a series of slow animations depicting such an awful environment to be trapped in. They really wanted to experience this world, to play it firsthand, to be at the wheel. And so, on July 12th, 2015, the Kickstarter was launched. It's worth noting that the original title for the game was Sacred Agony, as opposed to just Agony. The reason being that Tomek did not know if the name Agony was still copyrighted as far as video games are concerned or not. The goal was $620,000 and it was not met. Indeed, he only managed to raise a fraction of that. And for all we know, it could have actually ended there. An interesting idea that just failed because it didn't reach a larger audience. But we know now that wasn't the case. The game would eventually be developed. Either it was a stroke of sheer statistically improbable luck, or maybe someone down below was smiling up at him. In any case, this awful place filled with Venus flytrap head demons with big titties, bloody walls, and structures made of possibly living or dead human beings, and giant collections of arms and hands chasing after this hapless player, would see the light of day. Tomek would go on to found Madmind Studio, a collection of Polish game devs with their own experience, though I suppose it is worth mentioning that the most notable game of one of them, or multiple of them, that they have worked on is The Witcher 3. If nothing else, they certainly were no novices to this industry. They attempted a second Kickstarter on October 31st, 2016. The asking price was about $66,666. And sure enough, they not only made it, but far exceeded their expectations. Agony would see the light of day, and players would eventually be able to wander through the gates of hell and experience the horror. But with a game like this came a lot of concern. most notably about censorship. If this game was supposed to be the most brutal version of hell ever depicted, what stops a rabid group of social justice warriors from causing too much trouble for the devs to the point where Agony gets cancelled, or watered down if nothing else? For some people, it was not just a mere horror game. The amount of PT clones and Five Nights at Freddy clones could fill entire landfills. No, this was a game that would revitalize the genre of horror, to bring it back to its roots, to depict the most gruesome imagery mankind has ever known, and perhaps give people an idea of the sort of uncomfortable ideas that are integral to the very genre of horror. And no one wanted that censored. Time and time again, the developers on Kickstarter would try to assure its backers, no, the game won't be censored, it will stay true to its vision, it will be the brutal hell that some of them thought the savior of horror gaming itself should be. But talk is cheap, and these did little to assure people that the game would be uncensored. Couple that with them shilling out other Playway published games during a hiatus, and people remained vigilant and worried. Eventually the game would drop, and oh boy, did it drop. Agony was released on May 29th, 2018, and oh boy, did it do poorly. The game was pretty much universally panned as being an objectively poor video game. Be it the bugs and glitches, the lackluster gameplay, or the infuriating darkness, the game has failed in pretty much every endeavor it set out. It was not only unfun to play, but also not very enjoyable to look at either. While it was still quite brutal, it was censored to a degree that Madmind Studio admitted to and yet downplayed. In essence, everyone was pissed off.
It's a game that tries super hard to be a gruesome survival horror taking place in one of the most nightmarish places ever conceived by man. Unfortunately, what it is in reality is a boring piece of shit 3-hour game that takes place in one of the most infuriating places ever conceived by man.
You know what? No, it didn't win me over, and it's probably one of the worst games I think I've played so far in 2018.
And not only was it poor to play, but good grief was it broken. I slightly had my movement to the left. My character decided I'm going to jump all the way to the left as far as I can. Once your character moves in direction, there's really no correcting it.
The guy's invisible now. I'm being attacked by a ghost. Is this supposed to happen, or what's going on? Yikes! The Phantom of the Opera!
So yeah, problem after problem was stacked on top of each other, and this, for most indie studios, would have been the end. It seemed like the end for Madmind when they fell more or less silent to the larger gaming community afterwards. But they did periodically release some patches to correct some of the game-breaking bugs and glitches. It was playable, but the elephant in the room for many still remained. We were promised an unrated patch for the PC, given the fact it was also released on consoles that had stricter policies concerning adult imagery in video games, but they backtracked on that in the last minute, and it was never released as of the first release of the game. But they did not give up. they worked in secret on a new game, a sort of re-release of Agony Unrated. The game promised to deliver on all of the initial ideas that the first Agony was supposed to have. Everything would be uncensored, everything would be explicit, just as intended. It would be released on October 31st, or 30th, but was actually pushed ahead a few days, making it around 2 years after the initial Kickstarter for the first iteration of Agony. Agony Unrated was not only as violent and offensive and grotesque as people imagined the game would be, but it also provided a few new features that made the game far more enjoyable to play. The addition of a mini-map to help people navigate the confusing corridors of the game, better lighting systems, better enemy AI and placement, the ability to throw torches near environmental hazards to kill demons, a better system of leveling up with actual perks that mean something for the gameplay at large, environmental traps like these wrecking balls made of bodies or floors that crumble beneath you. It was a direct upgrade from Agony, and even better, to show that the studio really did have the best intentions in mind, it was free to anyone who purchased the original Agony. They would not try to nickel and dime you out of any additional funds. If you bought the first version of Agony, you would get Unrated at no cost. And Unrated was released at a reduced price as it is. As far as ratings go, it did far better than the original Agony. People actually enjoyed the game for a change, and it was able to get a mostly positive assessment on Steam. It is thus unfortunate that it has not been reviewed by many game critics. Most have just their review of Agony and nothing more, despite the changes made. This, of course, leads people to be initially distrusting of Agony Unrated, but I think the reviews speak for themselves. If nothing else, Madmind Studio is not giving up on their version of Hell, as they intend to create a new video game, a more action-oriented version of their Hell, starring the succubus character that plagued Nimrod's journey and served as a protagonist for one mode of Agony and Agony Unrated. Eventually they will release Succubus, and they've released a sort of animation-based concept trailer similar in nature to the initial animation concept trailers that Tomek has released before Agony was just an inkling of an idea. With all they've learned and all they've gone through, I hope that Madmind Studio has learned the ins and outs of game development and are able to make Succubus a successful and fun game to play when it is released. And so that concludes a history lesson of the edgy horror game Agony. I hope you enjoyed the video, or that I gave you something to think about, or otherwise entertained you. Take care.